This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I always like to get the perspective of the other AFC North teams because, again, it's so easy to get caught up in your own team's camp, in your own team's bubble, that you don't realize that everybody, like, it's the schedule game is always fun to do, right? Because we get so caught up into it and we're like, hey, we're going to be improved. We're going to be doing this and that. And no way this team's going to be able to beat us. And then we're not thinking that team's probably done stuff too, right? Everybody gets better in the NFL every year. And then that's how, like, fans always predict, oh, we're going to win 13 games. Easy. I don't see more than 4 losses in this schedule. You know? So I always like to take myself out the bubble, and then hopefully my audience comes with me. I brought on Derek Bell here. He's here to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Derek, it's been a good preseason for you guys, right? Especially from your first team, right? The offense, I think that's the thing that Steelers fans have been most concerned about. The complaints about Matt Canada have been frequent over the last few years. And then you have a preseason like this where the ball's moving, Kenny's making some nice throws, George Pickens is making some nice catches, and Jaylen Warren really looks good there too. How much can you take from this preseason? How much of the excitement that you get from just naturally watching your team do well, do you feel like you have to temper yourself a little bit so you don't end up disappointed during the regular season? Or have you seen enough throughout the offseason process to feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg with this offense?
Yeah, kind of like what you said, man, like trying to remove yourself from that bubble and try to maintain some realistic expectations is tough because, during the preseason, during training camp, everybody feels really good about, the team that they cover, the team that they cheer for. But there does need to be some perspective there for sure. In terms of the Steelers preseason, man, it was honestly best case scenario, especially for the offense. Like you said, that's really where the concerns kind of lied over the past recent seasons. But the first team offense, Pickett was in there for 5 drives. They scored 5 touchdowns. So, I mean, it's tough to not be at least a little bit optimistic about that. A couple of those drives were against mainly backups, which is something that is definitely necessary context. But, Kenny's looked really good. The offensive line's done a really good job pass protecting. You mentioned Jaylen Warren. I think that they're going to have a really nice 1-2 punch with Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren in the backfield. This is still going to probably be a pretty run-heavy offense because I think that they want to take the pressure off the young quarterback and kind of bring that along slowly. But overall, man, it definitely looks like they're ready for a step forward. I'm just not sure of, how big of a leap we're talking about. If they can carry over the momentum that they finished last season with in the summer, they definitely need to take a step forward if they're going to make the playoffs.
Kenny Pickett is one of those interesting topics, right? Because I just don't have a great gauge on where my expectations should be of him because the class he came out of was one of the weirder draft classes. So it's hard to compare him against people he came out with. And then, he's in this situation with Pittsburgh where he has like a little bit of a rough start. Well, not a rough start. He was actually fine when he first came in. A little bit of a rough patch in that middle of that rookie year and then really finished strong, especially like in some key moments. And then, you try to wrestle with the limits that you put on him as a draft pick, right? Where you draft Kenny Pickett, we're like, oh, well, the ceiling's here and this and that. When you're in the AFC and you have Kenny Pickett, like, where do you feel like he could be in that landscape realistically? And do you think that's enough to get you over the hump of, the Cincinnatis of the world, the Kansas Cities of the world, and, even the Philadelphias from the other side?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great question. It's something that is going to be a question that's going to be a hot topic, not only in Pittsburgh, but just everywhere. I mean, you mentioned the landscape in the AFC with all those talented quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow. I mean, it's just an absolutely loaded conference with elite top tier talent at the game's most important position. And, the ceiling is definitely something that was discussed a lot with Pickett as a draft prospect. Is he going to be able to be anything more than, kind of just like an average run of the mill kind of starter? And, he's going to have the the time to make that work and, level up his game another step in year two. I'm not sure if we can really say what the ceiling is just yet, but I think that Kenny, at least right now, is going to be a guy that is probably going to be a win with starter. So the way that I kind of classify quarterbacks is, you have your guys that you win because of, and those are usually the top 6 or 7 guys in the league at any particular time. And then you've got that kind of middle tier of guys that you win with. And those are the guys, like, if you put enough around them, you give them a good ecosystem on offense, you give them a supporting cast on defense, they're probably going to be enough to keep you in the mix for a playoff spot. And then you have your lower tiered starters, which are guys you're looking to replace, or your rookies that are just coming in. I think that Pickett has a really good chance to be a win with starter as early as this year. I really
Mhm.
do believe that. Now, is he going to be enough to get them into the postseason to where they're going to be able to go below to below with some of these high powered offenses? That is very much a question that, still has yet to be answered, I think.
Yeah, and it's one of those things was like, I don't know if Ryan Tannehill's gotten worse, but I do know since 2019, it's so much harder to get to the AFC Championship game with
Yep.
Ryan Tannehill or with Derek Carr, right? These guys who were previously seen as like, hey, if you put enough around them, you should be fine. And now it's really only that conversation for somebody in the NFC, right? Where there's Jalen Hurts and then there's Dak and then a bunch of guys in that class, like Kirk Cousins and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where I'm like, if you're Pittsburgh and you feel like you're starting to see a ceiling, you see him hit his head up against the ceiling, you almost have to be a little bit more aggressive because you're in this spot where it's like you're a young team, but you're also not a young team, right?
Right.
Your best 2 players, well, your best 3 players on defense, they're heading towards like the best years of their career. Cam Hayward's just at the best years of his career, even though he's like 35 or something like that.
Yeah.
He's having his prime like 10 years late. And then there's TJ Watt and there's Minka. And it's like, you got to win while that core is there. But if you don't feel like that quarterback position is what you need it to be, especially here, where it's like maybe Kenny, if he does hit that ceiling, or if that ceiling is a little bit better than Kirk Cousins, or at Dak Prescott, right? Like if he's Dak Prescott, it's like, oh, if that's not enough to get through the AFC, just because you have to go through Mahomes, and then you might have to play Burrow, right? And then you're in this division, and there's Watson, and there's Jackson, and there's all of these guys that you have to kind of battle through. I wonder what teams like Pittsburgh, Miami, teams that have quarterbacks that aren't terrible, but quarterbacks that they're not sure or can be in that conversation yet. It's just, what do you do at that point? And if you're the Steelers, from that perspective, I want to ask you, like, what do you think this team does if, like, let's say they get to 9 or 10 wins, and it's obvious the ceiling on this team is from the quarterback position? What do you think this organization does moving forward to try to correct that, or do they just kind of ride it out?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, just knowing how the Steelers operate, just organizationally, I think that they're going to play this pretty slow and give him time to kind of develop. So, in my opinion, this year, say the offense falls short of, we'll call it expectations. So, for my money, the Steelers probably need to finish somewhere around middle of the pack on offense. If they do that, I think they've got a good chance at making the postseason. If they fall short, they miss the playoffs, say they're in the bottom half of the league in offensive DVOA or anything like that, I think that the next step will probably be to bring in a different coordinator and kind of see if you can unlock more of Kenny Pickett's game or this offense's game and take it to a new level in year 3 of his rookie contract. I always kind of say to people in terms of quarterback play, if you've got a stable organization and at least a stable ecosystem, which the Steelers definitely do right now, it's great that if you can give the guy until year 3 to kind of prove, say, like, all right, let's look at where we are, where we can potentially go, and how do we mask some of these guys' deficiencies or help him get to his ceiling. So there's a couple different options. I think that the Steelers have good enough weaponry. George Pickens is incredibly talented. Deontay Johnson's a really good player as well. Pat Freiermuth. They've got a solid run game, improved offensive line. It's really going to come down to the questions involving the offensive coordinator and the quarterback, man. I really think that that's, where we're at. And there is a decent amount of pressure because, like you said, they're ready to win on defense right now. This should be a top 5 to top 10 defense with three. Their trio of Fitzpatrick, Hayward, and Watt, is one of the better, foundational trios that exists around the league. So they're ready right now, which makes for an interesting contrast with how young the offense is, how experienced the defense is.
It's got to suck to play offensive line for the Bengals. Like
Yeah.
that's 6 games a year where it's like, okay, here come the Browns, and it's Miles and Darius on both sides, and then TJ comes into town with Alex Highsmith there as well, and then Cam in the interior, and then it's like, okay, well, Baltimore comes in there, they don't really have anybody that you know of yet, but they always seem to be able to find pressure. So it's just
they're gonna blitz the hell out of you with simulated pressures and all kinds of crazy looks up front.
Yeah, so it's like it's not going to be. It's got to be that. I feel like that has to contribute to why they consistently have issues trying to fill that offensive line. And then also, like, they play in that scheme where it's like they get it empty a lot. They don't really chip. It's really just kind of leaving offensive tackles and guards on the island. And then Joe kind of holds the ball a little bit to give his guys some extra time to make those plays. It's just got to be rough.
Well, the thing with the Bengals too is, like you mentioned, they're a very heavy gun team. They do a lot of the gun run stuff. They're in 11 personnel. They spread it out, and that's because they have the personnel. I mean, they've got a really good quarterback. They've got arguably the best receiver course in the league. So they pretty much say, we're better than you guys. We don't need to do any of this misdirection. We don't need to do any play action, no motion. We're just going to line up and beat you the old fashioned way. So it puts a lot of stress on your offensive line when you don't have defenses really needing to respect the threat of, play action, or they don't have a very dynamic run game, but the weapons and the quarterback are just so freaking good that it's tough.
Yeah, it's like you could only, a lot of times we like fall into this trap of, we got to run that thing that Joe Burrow in Cincinnati's running. We got to do this thing Pat Mahomes is doing. You can only do that thing because you got Pat Mahomes, or you can only do that thing because you have Joe Burrow and you have those three wide receivers who are not just three good wide receivers. They're three wide receivers who are all good at different things. So like they can just be on the field all the time. So it's Cincinnati's one of those things where it's interesting. From Pittsburgh's perspective, you look at this division, Cincinnati's probably going to be good, right? Nothing's really changed there that's going to change their fortune. You look at Baltimore and you look at Cleveland. Baltimore switching over to a new offense, Todd Monken, and then they brought in Odell and some other wide receivers drafted Zay Flowers. You look at Cleveland, Deshaun Watson's first full year back. Last time he played a full season, he was pretty good. And then you have Nick Chubb, you have Elijah Moore coming over from New York, Amari Cooper. When you look at those two teams, what do you worry about from the Steelers' perspective if one of those two teams starts to live up to their potential?
Yeah, I think starting with we'll start with Baltimore. The Ravens are an interesting case study. You mentioned their kind of inability to keep guys healthy, but really it starts at the quarterback position, man. When Lamar is in the lineup, Baltimore wins, 70-something% of their games or something crazy like that. I mean, just whenever he's out there, they're incredibly good. And the Ravens, very steady foundation, really good organization who's always going to be competitive, always going to be physical. And that Todd Monken offense, can he unlock a different version of Lamar than what we've seen? He's been incredible when he's been healthy, but, there was some limitations with Greg Roman, his scheme, just how outdated some of the passing elements of it were. But, Monken, we don't really know what Lamar's going to look like in that system. But I think that just from a football fan perspective who likes watching scheme and good offenses and stuff, that's something that I'm interested to see is if, is there another level up for Lamar in this system? So that would be my biggest concern from a Baltimore perspective. For Cleveland, you mentioned Deshaun Watson. I mean, really Cleveland's fate really relies heavily on, him getting back to that form that we saw in Houston. I think from Cleveland addressed a lot of their issues in free agency. They got better, bigger, stronger, more physical at the point of attack on defense. They brought in Dalvin Tomlinson. You already mentioned Darius Smith. They brought in a lot of guys that are going to put more talent around Myles Garrett than they've ever had. The defense itself, I have some concerns in terms of at the linebacker play, but I think that this should be a better defense. This should be a top half of the league defense. You mentioned Elijah Moore. I think that that gives them a different element, a little bit different stylistic player than they've had in years past. Nick Chubb, you already know he's going to be one of the better running backs in the league. The offensive line's always good. Really, it's just about, can they mend what Stefanski typically wants to do on offense with what Watson does really well, and can they blend those two different ideas together and like help him get back to the level of player that he was in Houston?
One of the interesting things with the Browns too is Nick Chubb has averaged 5.2 yards a carry over 5 years, which is an insane number. And he's done that like since 2019. Like Mike Tomlin is one of the most obvious coaches with it. You ever listen to his pregame press conference? The whole week he's like, they bring up the Browns offense. They're like, oh yeah, well Baker can do this and that. It's like, yeah, Nick Chubb, he's really good. And we got to worry about this and that and how we're going to stop Nick Chubb, and then we'll worry about the rest of that. And it's like, that's been the mentality of every defensive coordinator that's played the Cleveland Browns since 2019 is, what do we do with Nick Chubb? What do we do with Nick Chubb? What do we do with Nick Chubb? If Watson gets to the point to where you have to be like, hey, what do we do about Watson? What do we do about Moore and what they're doing with this combo that they're doing with Coop and everything else? And they have to worry about all of these elements of the passing game. And then it's like, oh yeah, Nick Chubb. It really handcuffs a lot of defensive coordinators, because like, what happens when putting 8 in the box is not a thing you could do, or just stacking it is not a thing you could do, and you just have to go, hey, we're going to go on base. You gotta make a play. Minka's gonna have to come down, make a tackle. I'm gonna need one of the linebackers to step up and make a play, basically. And that's a wild world to live in too. And Nick Chubb has been playing at the level that he has. So it's gonna be interesting if the Browns can get to that point. If Watson can get to that point again, what defenses then choose to do. And I wonder how long it's going to take teams to make that adjustment, because I imagine the first 5 weeks of the season, teams are going to be like, we're going to prepare as if this is the team we played last year. With the Pittsburgh Steelers, what do you think is going to change about this team that's going to change how teams have to game plan? Like, what do you think is that big change in the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, offensively or defensively, that's going to really be a huge adjustment for a lot of teams during the year?
I think from an offensive perspective, I think there's just the natural evolution of not having a rookie quarterback, and him being more comfortable in the pocket. I think you saw some of that in the preseason. One of the things, coming out of college, Kenny Pickett had a really bad habit of kind of bailing out of the pocket prematurely, always kind of going out the back door instead of hitching up and resetting his feet, keeping his eyes down the field and firing in the ball. He just looks a lot more comfortable. Granted, it's in a really small sample size, but I think that you hope that all that experience that he gained last year, that they will be not just more, steady on offense, but I think that they're going to be like more on schedule, and also it should give them a chance for a little bit more of an explosive offense as well. I think on defense, man, it really just starts with getting TJ back healthy. He only played about half the season last year. I think, the difference between the Steelers defense with him on and off the field is just catastrophic. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of difference that guy can make. But I think that if you're looking for like a change, I just think that the amount of pass rushers they have up front, Cam Hayward, TJ, Alex Highsmith, everyone kind of knows about them, but they've added Keanu Benton. Larry Ogunjobi is hopefully going to be more healthy than he was last year. And then I think if you even look at the backup edge spots, which has been a little bit of a touch and go situation over the past like 4 or 5 years for them. But you look at, they brought in Marcus Golden. They drafted Nick Herbig, who's been unbelievable in the preseason. So now, TJ and Alex, they can still play their 75, 80% of the snaps, but then the offensive tackles don't just get 25% of the snaps, where they don't have to worry about the guy across from them, because you're rolling out, practice squad level guys. These guys can legitimately rush the passer. I mean, the fact that Marcus Golden, who's had some really productive seasons in the NFL, is going to probably be their 5th best pass rusher is that's incredibly exciting, if you're a Steelers fan.
So the Browns, for the last few seasons, I've always said this, the thing that's tanked their seasons the last couple of years is, I think it's been obvious, it's quarterback play, right? You get good quarterback play in 2020, and the Browns are a playoff team. They go 11-5, they win a playoff game, they almost beat the Chiefs. You get bad quarterback play in 2021, you're a very frustrating 89 team. You get mixed quarterback play in last year. Jacoby Brissett was fine for what you wanted him to be, but he's Jacoby Brissett. Like, there's obvious limitations, or a much smaller margin of error that you have, right? Your defense can't stink if Jacoby Brissett is your quarterback. The defense stunk. That team went 7-10. If you look around at all the teams in the North, what do you think, including the Steelers, what do you think is the one thing where it's like, hey, if this isn't what we wanted or expect it to be, this is going to be a massive problem for this team and could poke a giant hole in their season?
Yeah, so I mean, I won't cheat and say quarterback play for everybody because I think that that's probably the
Mm-hmm.
obvious answer. We've probably hit on enough about how important that stuff is. But um, I think from the Ravens' perspective, I think that the pass rush, there's a combination for me. I'm a little bit curious on if they have enough pass rush up front to where they're not going to have to just be super aggressive blitzing on defense.
Mm.
That's not really what they want to do anymore schematically. They're a lot more multiple than they were, under previous regimes, and I think they've got a lot of talent over there. I'm a little bit concerned about the edge spots. They're still kind of waiting on some breakouts. David Ajabo working his way back from injury. Always a guy who's always been more traits than actual production. So I'll say the pass rush for Baltimore.
And if they
For Cincy,
can't get pressure with
you got to
Baltimore,
blitz.
then you have to blitz, and then they get caught blitzing, or they get caught in the habit of blitzing too much. You could take Roquan, who's excellent in the run game, out of the run game, or you can put him in situations where you're just running a lot of base out there, and then teams are taking advantage of that, lining up receivers on him. And then also they lost Marcus Peters, and Marlon Humphrey's going to be gone for at least the first week or two in the
They're
season
already
this year.
banged up back there.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, if you can't force teams to get rid of this ball, then there's going to be a lot to exploit on them, because that was the book on Baltimore last year. You could throw on them if you wanted. You just couldn't sit there and try to run the ball 30 times on them. They were going to kill you if you did that, but you can throw on them. And that has actually, in my opinion, like, your ability to throw on them, I feel like it's gotten exploited. Even like, it's more exploitable than it was last year, because you kind of had to hope that, hey, Marcus Peters going to have one of them weird games, and then you could really take advantage of him with some double moves, because sometimes he just loses patience, right? And he bites, he tries to bite the apple. But yeah, Baltimore, that's a really interesting problem for them.
Yeah, I think from Cincinnati's perspective, you mentioned they're definitely kind of the cream of the crop of this division. Until somebody knocks them off that pedestal, you kind of still have to assume that they're the favorites. I think for them, man, they brought back so many pieces and they're so solid. You know what they are on offense. I think that their offense is really something that you can replicate, at least year to year with the quarterback that they have. I think on defense, the biggest question mark is probably going to be some of the turnover in the secondary. Eli Apple's no longer there. They've got two new starting safeties. They bring in Nick Scott. Dax Hill was the guy they took early in the draft 2 years ago. You lose Jesse Bates. They also ended up losing Von Bell to free agency. What does the back end of that defense look like? I could see some growing pains early in the season back there. I think that they like some of their young players in the secondary. Cam Taylor-Britt had a nice rookie season for what he was. But anytime you're flipping that many pieces in the secondary, you worry about some communication issues. You worry about are we going to give up a bunch of explosive plays early in the year? So that would be my biggest probably concern with Cincinnati. But man, that roster is damn good. It's really good. They're good on offense. They're going to probably be a top 10, 15-ish defense.
Mm-hmm.
They're still the favorites in the division, in my opinion.
Yeah, the only thing I think can slow them down is if this calf thing with Joe Burrow ends up being like a lingering thing throughout the season.
Good.
Where it's like, oh, and it's not going to be, when I say lingering, I'm not like saying he's going to miss a bunch of games because of it, where it's just like he's always on the injury report with it, right? Like, and it's like, it's always there. If it's week 15 and we're still asking questions about the calf, that's where I'm like, okay, this might not have gone the way that Cincinnati wants it, because that might affect them on the margins, and that might be a big change for Cincinnati if he can't operate at his highest level. Then all of a sudden, how they do handle the pass rush becomes a much bigger issue, because he might not be able to just toss it at last minute and get it to Jamar Chase and make those spectacular plays. So that's the only thing I can really see going wrong with Cincinnati is like, hey, if this Joe Burrow calf thing is something we forget about by week 2, then yeah, they're probably going to win 12 games. But if it isn't, then I can see them kind of like limping to like 10, maybe like getting 11 or being around that, like just slightly below expectation number. What do you feel could be that thing that sinks the Steelers?
I think from the Steelers' perspective, man, from an offensive perspective, it's still got to be we need to see them compete in a shootout with some of these high-powered offenses. I think that's just a question that has not been answered. I mean, I can't tell you the last time that they scored 30 points. I know it's been at least a year and a half. So, what happens when they have to face some of these high-powered offenses? Can they go toe-to-toe with Cincinnati if they have a game where they're fully healthy and they can put up 35 points or something like that? So until they win one of those shootouts, it's always going to be in the back of my head like, well, we haven't seen it, so how can you be confident against it? The other thing with the Steelers that I will say that's a little bit concerning is the cornerback position. I mean, in years past, they've masked some cornerback issues because of how dominant their front's going to be. And I already mentioned that, they have so many pass rushing demons up front that it may not matter at all, to be honest. They may just be able to wreck teams in the trenches. But I do worry a little bit about, Patrick Peterson being, 33, 34 years old. What can he still do athletically in a scheme that's going to be asking him to play some more man coverage than what he's been used to in the past couple of seasons? You're going to be starting, at least in nickel. It seems like Joey Porter Jr. is going to be out there. He's a rookie, so rookie corners, I mean, they're extremely volatile. And then, even at the slot position, Mike Hilton left a couple seasons ago to go to the Bengals. Cam Sutton's kind of been that kind of move piece where they kind of move him around wherever they need him that particular week. Well, he's no longer there. And they've got, Chandon Sullivan and Elijah Riley kind of as those two inside guys, neither of which are really great in coverage. So I have a little bit of concerns at the cornerback spot. So that would be the biggest kind of red flag for me on defense.
Yeah, and the thing about the point you made on offense is sometimes you can have these offenses, especially like in these wide zone inspired, Shanahan style offenses is what we use the terminology with anything that uses a ton of play action in wide zone, is they'll move the ball, but you got to play this like 10, 15 yard game. You got to play this high possession time style game where you got to win the possession battle. You got to win this. You got to like score on like 7 of your 9 possessions. And when you have to play like that, because that's kind of how the Browns had to play with Brissett, it's like the margin of error is 1 interception. And that plan goes out the window. Hell, what happened to the Browns a lot was they just didn't score before halftime, right? And then the other team will get the ball we'll get a 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. And then the ball after halftime, they're up by 14. We got nothing, right? We can't do anything. Like, that's how easy it is to just fall down by multiple scores. And that's the issue when you don't have multiple paths to victory offensively, right? Because it's okay to win that way. It's okay to win the grinded out games. You're still gonna have to do that, especially in the AFC North. The weather gets bad, but you also want to be able to, go toe to toe. If I have to score 30 points, I'm not worried about that. If we're down 14, okay, we get the ball in the second half. We can score there. It's not going to be that big of a deal. We don't have to spend a whole quarter trying to dig out of a hole there. That's the stuff that I think sometimes we'll see, and in practice, it's hard to kind of pace that out because they're running the offense. It looks fine in practice, right? Because you're not thinking about how long it's going to take to score. You're not thinking about the time of possession. You're not thinking about the margin of error. You're like, okay, they're executing. And then you get into a game, you're like, well, they're executing, but they're not moving fast enough to keep up with other teams unless they play a super safe style of football. And that's just hard to do today. So, I'm worried about that with the Browns. Like, are they going to open it up with Deshaun enough? Are they going to let him go? Are they going to be too kind of stuck in their own playbook to be like, hey, Deshaun, get the 5, get the 7, and keep moving the ball slowly up the field. And then if you're doing that at that point, it's like, why did you pay Deshaun all that money? So it's going to be interesting to see how the AFC North shakes out. I think this is one of the more intriguing divisions in sports. If you're a fan of this division, and you have a team that's out of network, this is one of them divisions where it's like, yeah, the Sunday ticket is worth it because you will use it because there are good
definitely.
matchups.
And you mentioned too, like just with are they going to let Deshaun go? And I think it's really going to be a test of patience with Stefanski too, because they're going to need to let him kind of get more comfortable. I think that that was the biggest kind of eye opener. I think for a lot of people when they saw Watson play last year was just how uncomfortable he looked in
Mm-hmm.
the pocket. And I think that that could be, expected to a degree because it had been so long since he had played actual live football. And there's no substitute for live bullets. You can't in practice, these guys that are at the quarterback position, they're not in fear of their lives. They're not getting hit. They don't have to worry about a pass rush really.
It's like
And
sparring and boxing,
yeah,
right? Like you're not actually like fighting. You know what I mean? It's
right.
not the same level of exhaustion.
Yeah, so it's just really tough to replicate that, and until he gets in games, you don't really know what he's going to be able to do. And I think that him getting some playing time in the preseason was good. One of the things that I noticed about the Browns in the preseason, I haven't been able to watch a ton, but I did notice when I was watching and Watson was in there that they were using a lot of empty. That's definitely something that he liked a lot in Houston, be able to spread the looks out. That helps make things a little bit easier on the quarterback from a pre-snap perspective. Spread the defense out. They can't be as exotic in their looks. You kind of can dictate matchups based on all those different weapons that he has on offense now. So
Mm-hmm.
again, the thing with Watson is just going to be blending what Stefanski really wants to do on offense with what Watson has always been really good at. Blending those two things together, it's going to be a fascinating, I think, case study for really both guys who, honestly, from a reputation standpoint, have a good amount kind of riding on this season.
Mm-hmm.
Stefanski's a guy that probably needs some type of results here in the next year or two, and Watson, he's probably got a pretty big chip on his shoulder based on how last season went after he returned.
And we let Kyle Shanahan fool us into thinking like, oh, because he could throw Brock Purdy in there, anybody could play in the wide
Kyle's
zones
a different
offense.
dude.
Yeah, and well, it's like and Kyle's successful, but you have to also look at the type of guys he's always successful with. He seems to have a type, right? And even that, then he kind of still hits his head on that quarterback ceiling a lot. And part of the reason that is because like when you're in that Shanahan system, it's like, okay, I want you to check out this side. Well, look at the field, see how many safeties are out there, see where this guy's gonna buzz, and then if he buzzes here, we're here. Right, we're just gonna disregard the other half. Right, we're going 1-2 check on this side, and that works when your quarterback might not be the most capable in the world. But if you try to throw Big Ben in that offense, Big Ben ain't doing none of that, right? Because that's not how Big
Yeah, I
Ben
think
plays. It's like there's certain quarterbacks that just can't be in that style system. And I think that was the biggest eye opener for Stefanski last year was Deshaun looked especially terrible when he was trying to do the stuff that Jacoby Brissett could do well, right? Where it's like, okay, get to the top of your drop, just get rid of it if you see him here and just high low it, right? That's not how he likes to play football. So he looked so uncomfortable doing it on top of the rust and the 700-day layoff. I think that was an eye opener for Stefanski where he was like, okay, I there's a lot that I'm going to have to give up here with this offense in order to adjust it for Deshaun.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned with the Shanahan stuff, I mean, I've spent really most of the summer kind of just reading up on and learning like more and more about the intricacies of how that offense works. And I think Shanahan just kind of honestly looks at the quarterback kind of like a point and shoot type quarterback. Like, I know my stuff works. All I need you to do is just trust me. If this is
He
the
looks
coverage you
at it
get, this
like
is where I want you to go with the
another
ball.
position, right? Like that's
Yeah,
how he looks at it. He doesn't look at it as this fixer of like,
yeah,
okay,
and I
you're basically this empowered coach that can throw the football. He's like, I want you to do this. The same way he tells a running back, you see this, go do this. You see that, do that. It's the same way he looks at quarterback.
and I think that there is a element to compromise with that because I think if you ask a really talented athletic quarterback with more tools than a lot of the guys that Shanahan's had success with, it can honestly feel like kind of a governor's chip on, your quarterback. So you look at guys, a good example of that would be like Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers hit kind of a little bit of a snag in his career where he wasn't as efficient. They bring in LaFleur, and they kind of have to spend really that first like 12 months kind of blending those two offenses together on, okay, what does McFleur like, from that Shanahan scheme, and then what does Aaron like, and what does he do well, and well, let's blend those two things together. And I think that could be something that happens for Stefanski and Deshaun. It's going to take work. It's going to take compromise on both people. I think that Stefanski is going to definitely want to see Watson play a little bit more in structure. And I think that Watson's going to want to probably spread the defense out a little bit more and be a little more aggressive on offense than maybe Stefanski's been able to be with some of the quarterbacks that he's had in the past, like Jacoby, Baker Mayfield, things like that. I think Deshaun wants to open it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to be. And then we haven't even touched on Lamar being in that air raid, which is like, I mean, that's a different offense to the Greg Roman one. And they're still going to try to, like, I saw them in the preseason. They were still running some of that pistol run set, the heavy out of pistol, the super wide read option that they do where the quarterback basically just squats and holds the ball out front. So it's going to be interesting. A lot of offenses trying a lot of new things. And then there's the Bengals who they have some things up and down. Like, we don't know what Joe Burrow is going to look like this year or if that calf's going to be a thing that pops up with them. And I always say this with the AFC North. We will either have every team finish above 500 or every team's going to feel like they underachieved this year. Right? Like, that happens every year. We're like, it's going to be the greatest division on earth. Everybody's going to win. It's like, no, we have to play each other. So, like, maybe somebody gets to 11 wins. But it's just going to be interesting to see the defenses, especially this year. I mean, like, I don't think there's a bad defense. I don't even think there's an all right defense in the bunch right now. Maybe Cincinnati could dip to that, but they've been so good the last few years. It's hard to just assume that of them because they don't have the personnel. They haven't had great personnel in years. So it's going to be interesting to see what this turns into. Look, if a quarterback gets in the MVP conversation in this division, they should win it. Because
more power to them.
Yeah, because this is not an easy division to put up stats in. But thank you for coming on, Derek. Where can people find you at, man?
You can hit me up on Twitter. My handle is Steelers_DB, either on Twitter, on YouTube, stuff like that. So, yeah, right. It was fun, man. I appreciate you having me on, dude.
Check him out, man. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night.